Hello, and thank you for joining us. I'm David DeWitt. I'm the Trade Relations Manager here at the Oregon Wine Board. Thanks again for joining us. This is our third installment of our Oregon Wine Month education, hosted by Bree Stock, our Director of Education, MW. We appreciate everybody joining us, and we are happy to be right in the middle of Oregon Wine Month, which is May every year, and it's our way to connect with the trade, with consumers, and kind of get everybody excited about Oregon wine and develop a closer relationship with the wines that we produce here statewide. Today, we're going to be focusing on regional reds. I'm going to just talk about a couple of housekeeping issues here. Devices should be muted. And today we'll be looking at the question feature, and we should have the chat up as well. So if there's things that are coming into your mind and you have a question or would like some feedback, we're happy to take a look at that and answer them as they come up. The webinar will be recorded, and we will put that onto our trade site. You can see the URL there. And we also post it to our Oregon Wine Month Toolkit. I can drop that here in the chat shortly. These usually go for about an hour or so, and we're excited to talk about regional reds today. Bree, thank you so much. Please take it away.
Thank you, David. Yeah, it's been a great start to Wine Month, and it's certainly going to, I think, continue with this beautiful weather that we're getting out in Oregon now. I know that there's been like a lot of action around the Pair It Forward campaign that the Oregon Wine Board has been doing as well. And so that's been a lot of fun to watch all of our producers talking about what chefs and what food pairings their favorite wines go with. So be sure to check that out as well on the Oregon Wine Board Instagram site, and sign up for the trade newsletter as well, or consumer newsletter. We are going to dive in today into Oregon's regional red wines. So the last seminar or webinar, we conquered the regional whites. And since, Oregon does grow more than 70 different grape varieties, there's certainly a lot to cover, but we're going to focus on those varieties that really have a meaningful amount of plantings across Oregon, and especially in the major AVAs. So here is one of my favorite pictures from Oregon, which is Mount Hood Cloudcatcher, that you can generally see almost anywhere where you are in sort of the North Valley, northern part of Oregon, whether you're in the Columbia Gorge or the northern Willamette Valley. And truly across that Columbia Gorge and Willamette Valley area, this is where there's so many grape varieties planted, and the bulk of our production is planted. Just so everyone is up to speed, as we continue to grow as a state and as a region and continue to mature, our producers are really seeking out to further define our appellations, or American viticultural areas, as they're called here in the US, so AVAs. So Oregon has 23 AVAs now. Several of those are cross-border AVAs, which we share with either Washington or Idaho. So we have three that are in the northern part shared with Washington, that being Columbia Gorge on the western edge, Columbia Valley, and then Walla Walla Valley shared with Washington. And then Idaho, we share the Snake River Valley AVA with, which is just an absolutely stunningly dramatic AVA, really carved by that really powerful river system, same as the Columbia River system. We'll chat a little bit about that as we get into why Oregon is such a great place for fine quality wine growing, and those river systems really have a lot to do with it. That said, the major AVAs, the Willamette Valley and Southern Oregon AVA, is really where most of the growth is happening in the AVA expansion. In 1983, the Willamette Valley AVA was settled or started, and within that we now have over 10 different AVAs. So we are really expanding, really getting to know our place, and those producers that are based in these AVAs are really starting to define what makes a fine quality region and why these place names or areas should really be carved out and discussed as unique and individual terroirs or regions within the Willamette Valley. So be sure to check out a few of those new ones. The Van Duzer Corridor AVA, Mount Pisgah, Polk County, Lower Long Tom, Laurelwood, and Tualatin Hills are all the newest AVAs in the Willamette Valley. So just to get a sense of really where the production for Oregon wine is happening across the state, the Willamette Valley does have the bulk of plantings and production, with Southern Oregon coming swiftly in behind as well and continuing to expand. Both AVAs are really expanding each year. The Columbia Gorge to the north and Columbia Valley and Walla Walla Valley are also regions where growth is really thriving, as other agricultural areas and wooded logging parcels are really starting to be transferred across into high quality vineyard estates. This is where we're starting to see a lot of growth in where other agriculture and industries are starting to slow down. So Oregon's top grape varieties, as I mentioned earlier, we have more than 70. I think we're up above 80 by now. As Foundation Plant Services continue to release more and more varieties that have been certified as clean plant material and brought into the US, we have more and more access through our nursery systems to purchase different grape varieties and really see what variety of varietal material can be planted here in Oregon to make fine wine, whether it's Grüne Veltliner, Riesling, Chasselas, Blaufränkisch, Menthea. There's a host of varieties that are being played with now for commercial use that are really starting to shine and just really show what Oregon can do in terms of making premium quality wines. So Oregon's top red varieties, which are going to be our focus today, obviously Pinot Noir makes up the bulk, with it being planted in every AVA and primarily in the Willamette Valley and Southern Oregon AVAs. However, the next largest variety, which is continuing to increase at a rate of knots, especially in the Rogue Valley of Southern Oregon and the Walla Walla Valley, is Syrah. It's really increasing quite swiftly. Sorry, Megan. Yeah, I've updated the numbers from the 2021 Vineyard and Winery Report for current numbers. So these figures are all current. I just haven't wiped out that 2020 on the bottom of the report. So back to the discussion here. Pinot Noir being the major variety, Syrah coming up strong behind that. Also Cabernet Sauvignon, 5% of plantings, Cabernet Franc, Merlot, Malbec, the Bordeaux varieties are also increasing, and Tempranillo has a well-established history in Oregon as well, and in fact is the first place where Tempranillo was planted in the US, so we'll get to that later as well. But as you can see, the obsession with Pinot Noir continues. However, there is just a lot of engagement with other varieties as they come on board. Keep in mind, though, that since this information comes from the Oregon Wine Board's Vineyard and Winery Report, the Oregon Vineyard and Winery Report, which is a survey that is sent out to growers and producers. It's not a mandatory survey, it is volunteer, and not every grape variety is listed on there. So the section of other on here sits at around 8%. So there's a lot of other varieties that are not being identified in the Vineyard and Winery Report, simply because it would be an ongoing, never-ending, seemingly survey to fill out for producers. But exciting to see what growth is happening out there in the varietal sector. So what makes Oregon really great for growing fine wine? It's a combination of a lot of factors. So for one thing, our growing season is generally very free from a lot of rainfall. We have basically from June until mid-September, really long sunny days with high UV and very limited cloud cover. So big blue skies, lots of access to sunshine. We also have a very cool northerly latitude, which is further cooled and moderated by river systems and the Pacific Ocean to our west. And all of that contributes to making grapes that are very fresh, but have great ripeness, and that ripen at a protracted rate. So meaning that they develop flavor development without just developing sugars. So more moderate alcoholed wines with fresher acidity and moderate to firm tannins really means that these wines are really great for food friendly and aging potential. We also have fairly young, vigorous soils. So marine sedimentary bedrock is our most ancient soil. We'll discuss this in the next webinar a little bit deeper, but just to give you the baseline, marine sedimentary soils that are really free draining, more nutrient poor than the younger volcanic soils. The volcanic soils retain water a lot better, but that also leads to quite a lot of vigor as well in the vineyard. So this combined with our climate also allows us in many areas to dry farm or farm our grapes without irrigation. So that's one thing that does stand Oregon apart from California and Washington, is that ability to really grow fine wine at high quality levels without the need for irrigation during that growing season. We also have a lot of biodynamic and sustainable and organic producers who are committed to those practices, and increasingly viticulturists that are committed to those practices as well. As anyone will tell you as well, the terroir of a place is very is also influenced by the people who are growing on it and working it. So a lot of our viticulturists are very conscious about what they're putting on their land, what they're putting on their fruit, and what their growers, their workers are really putting on the vine. So very organic, conscious-minded practices, and also not polluting our riverways that are often salmon runs as well. Most of our producers, or a lot of them, actually live on their estates. So there's just a lot more attention to detail for being on that, living in the place that you're working every day as well. So these basically are the how the soils formed. So we had the Juan de Fuca and North American plates collide, which brought up the marine sediments and created a series of underwater volcanic eruptions that really raised our major coast range and Cascade mountain systems, which are what define and help to control the weather elements in Oregon as well. You can see the mighty Columbia River there in that left-hand image is really helps to moderate the climate there and facilitate airflow between the eastern part of the state and the western cool Pacific Ocean. That river system was further really defined and carved out by the Missoula floods, which was the last real dramatic soil or really soil carving system that happened and formed some of our youngest soils. So we have a lot of windblown loess and glacially carved fine-grained basalt loess soils that are fine-grained volcanic sediments lying on top of deep basalt bedrocks, and then below that the marine sedimentary profiles. This is mostly occurring in the north of the state, in the northern part of the Willamette Valley and all along the Columbia River Gorge and out into Walla Walla. In the southern part of the state and south of Salem, we have primarily ancient marine sediments and alluvial soils that are carved out from the moving of river systems that have happened over millennia. So these geographical landmarks of Oregon are really important to the styles of wine that we're able to grow here, and also to really, influencing the size of our industry and the amount of growth that Oregon wine can achieve as well. So we're really defined by these very cool river systems, quite large river systems. The Columbia River in the north, which separates Washington and Oregon, is the fourth largest river in the US, and it really sends a lot of powerful water out into that Pacific Ocean from the Blue Mountains. From the Blue Mountains in the east, there flows down into between Oregon and Idaho in that Snake River Valley, a very deeply carved glacial river valley that is starting to show a lot of promise for high elevation, almost desert-like growing, and irrigation out there is required, and along the northern Washington border as well. So irrigation coming from the Columbia River and the Snake River for those vineyards, but also that also allows more diversity of grape varietal plantings to occur as well, and also more late ripening varieties as well. In the Willamette Valley is actually situated around the Willamette River and the Willamette River watershed. So that's what defines the AVA boundaries. And so that Willamette River is a very important river system that has a lot of tributaries that flow off of it that really help to moderate the vineyards in the Willamette Valley along with the Pacific Ocean. So there are several low-lying points in the Coast Range, which is a fairly low-lying mountain range that blocks a lot of that really cool Pacific Ocean weather and Pacific Ocean storms from really impacting the Willamette Valley during the growing season. So it tends to act as a benevolent cooling process that means that when the interior of Oregon heats up and we really get a hot weather push that blows down the Columbia River and across the Cascades, that Pacific Ocean sort of acts like a vacuum and pushes back in, cooling down the Willamette Valley after just a few days. So when you're here in Oregon during the summer, we have beautiful sunny days and weather that's often in above the mid 90s, but that weather will often only be around for 3 to 4 days before that Pacific Ocean pushes back and cools it down again. So we have a lot of really nice moderation to our weather patterns, which means that our grapes don't get overly baked in the sun as well and desiccated. So continuing that protracted, really complex layered flavor development because of the moderating influences of the Pacific Ocean there. Moving further south into the greater Southern Oregon appellation, which is really split into two appellations, the Umpqua Valley AVA and the Rogue Valley AVA. Again, both defined by river systems as well. The Umpqua River that runs out into the Pacific Ocean through Elkton AVA. Again, most of the plantings in both the Willamette Valley and Umpqua Valley are planted on the western sides of the AVAs as well. But this means that there's also a lot of opportunity for continued growth on the eastern foothills of the Cascade Ranges there. Moving down into the Rogue Valley, the Rogue River and Applegate Rivers are really what provide a lot of the irrigation and wind movements and cooling influences in the Rogue Valley AVA. These rivers have moved over time, and so a lot of the vineyards now are actually planted on what is old riverbed soils from these rivers as they carve their way through the valley and change over time. So really lots of deep free draining soil that's not incredibly vigorous and has a lot of stones to warm up and really heat these grapes and allow for a wider diversity of grape growing to happen in these AVAs. So mountains and river systems are really important for Oregon for how these moderate our elevations, the aspects of the vineyards that we're able to plant on, and how they really moderate the cooling and heating of our vineyard systems, giving us a really moderate climate to grow grapes in, which allows great flavor development at moderate alcohol levels and a good retention of acidity as well. The other factor that's important is our region's latitude. So I mentioned earlier that we're a cool northerly region. We do sit between 42 and 46 degrees north of the equator, so a northerly latitude, which means that during the winter months we have very limited daylight hours, and during the summer months we have from 5 a.m. Through to nearly 10 p.m. at night. So 15 to 16 hours of daylight during the growing season. And we know that it's not only heat that's important to ripening grapes. Sunlight into wine is a real thing, and we need to have UV sunshine hitting those grape clusters. And because of our gentle northerly leaning, we get a more gentle sun onto our fruit as well. So that combined with our cooling influences of our river systems, the cool air drainage off the mountains and off of the Pacific Ocean, all of those items combine to give us a really moderate sunshine that feels quite warm, but it's not warm enough to burn the fruit. And what that means is that unlike in California and in Washington, where they have quite harsh sunshine that is really capable of burning the fruit there, we can expose our grapes to the sunshine at an earlier time and allow this gentle sunshine to help ripen our grapes. Even though we may have a slightly cooler growing season, we get full flavor development because of that UV, additional UV and sunshine heat access. This is the other thing that's important in Oregon as well, is that during the crucial growing season from mid-June through to mid-September, early October, we have very limited rainfall. And as you can see in the crucial months of July, August, and September, we have barely any rainfall. We have barely any clouds in the sky. And this is very different to places like Burgundy and Bordeaux, where they continue to have constant rainfall and cloud cover during that crucial growing months there. So this also leads to us being able to more fully embrace organic farming practices and biodynamic farming practices, because we don't have as much disease pressure during those months. So that means that our soil has less compaction from tractors, and our people don't have to spray as much, and our river systems don't get as impacted by those sulfur sprays that can flow down down into the soils and then into the river systems. So a lot more conscious farming practices are able to happen because of our very favorable climate conditions. And the other thing that is important is that we are a community of really small artisan producers. Most Oregon wineries produce less than 5,000 cases per year. And there are multiple producers in California and Washington that make more wine than all of the wineries in Oregon combined. So while we only make up 1% of US fine wine production, we really over deliver in our quality profile because of all of those other reasons that I've just been through as well. And because we are small estate producers, we're in the vineyard more, we're on our land more, and making those decisions for the benefits of our family and our vineyard stewards and our staff that we work with day in, day out. Smaller farming practices are important for being able to be reactive in a growing season and really be held accountable for your farming conditions as well. So biodynamics and regenerative and organic farming really is on the increase, and Oregon has some of the highest certified biodynamic and regenerative organic certifiers in the US here. More and more people are looking at the regenerative organic farming practices, which include bringing animals and livestock into the vineyard, primarily sheep, for grazing instead of tractors for tillage and further compacting the soil. So trying to grow and farm responsibly in a whole ecosystem, a holistic ecosystem. Okay, let's move into the grape varieties. Pinot Noir is the state's #1 grape variety, and with good reason. It has a great legacy of producing high quality fine wines that stand up to some of the world's best Pinot Noirs. And this is further being confirmed as the vines get older, as we have more clonal material selections that are really starting to shine in Oregon as well. And also, again, as our producers, our farmers, and our winemakers are traveling more and also having more experience with their land and with their materials, every year the quality of Oregon Pinot Noir continues to rise, and we continue to be outstanding in the world of Pinot Noir growing globally. So it is the most planted red variety in both the Willamette Valley and in Southern Oregon, although most people are not so aware that it was the first planting of it was actually in the Umpqua Valley in 1960 by Richard Summers. And then it followed into the Willamette Valley in 1965 by a handful of gentlemen who mostly came up from California to establish vineyards in the Willamette Valley. Sadly, there's just a handful of own-rooted plantings that remain from production that hasn't been impacted by phylloxera, and these plantings are really those that are the most isolated and don't have other vineyards or are sharing vineyard equipment. So David Hill Winery is one of the majors out on the Tualatin Hills that still has full deep-rooted old vines that are not on rootstock and are not suffering from phylloxera. There's also a couple in the Chehalem Mountains in the Laurelwood AVA, and of course still some at Erie as well. So these vineyards are really the jewels in the crown, and produce a very different Pinot Noir than those that are on rootstock in the other parts of the state and AVA. So what do we know about Pinot Noir besides that it's Oregon's #1 variety? It is a fairly thin-skinned grape, which is why so many original producers really focused on bringing Pinot Noir to the Northwest, being that this was such a cool, wet climate in comparison to California. However, as I mentioned earlier, that unique UV aspect means actually that the skins of Pinot Noir here in Oregon and the Willamette Valley are actually thicker than they would be in an area that doesn't have as much wind impact and as much sunshine impact. So as a result, Oregon's Pinot Noirs tend to be slightly deeper in color and slightly fleshier and a little riper because of that lack of any cloud cover or rain that's going to dilute the fruit or hamper the quality. So we can really push the ripeness and flavor development of our Pinot Noirs here because of our unique climate. That said, we're still mostly sitting as Pinot Noir in a medium-bodied, sometimes full-bodied, moderate alcohol, moving in some years into a higher alcohol profile, but primarily we're sitting in moderate tannins, moderate alcohols, and very fresh red fruit flavors. So cherries, raspberries, pomegranates, cranberry notes, and then as we age, we definitely get more easily into mushroom, clove, tea flavors, some floral notes of rose and hibiscus, and potpourri characters as well. So really very classical Pinot Noir flavors. And depending on your proximity to the coast or to higher elevations is really what's going to determine your fruit profile. So warmer marine sedimentary soils and lower elevations tend to have more full-bodied, blue-fruited, and black cherry and sometimes plum fruit profiles for Pinot Noir, while higher elevations, as you move into the 300 through all the way up to 800, 900 feet elevations, you're starting to move into the more of those ethereal strawberry, hibiscus, floral red tones of fruit profile. Pinot Noir is typically destemmed here in Oregon, although you are seeing a lot more producers that are working with whole clusters, especially as we have continued drier years and the rachis or stems of the clusters are able to brown. And so when you're fermenting on your skins and stems, you're not extracting green flavors. So there have been some good attributes that come from a warming climate here, being that we can start to add some more non-fruit complexity through those stems, stem tannins, and not just sweet oak profiles as well. So those whole cluster characters will show themselves in the wine as more baking spice, more lifted fruit characters, more bay leaf and clove and cinnamon bark flavor profiles. Typically also Pinot Noir in Oregon is not always over vintaged. So a lot will be held until just prior to the next harvest and bottled before the harvest. It's only a lot of reserve bottlings or those that feel like they need some extra time in barrel that will be over vintaged. So most of the Pinot Noirs that will currently be in your market are likely going to be the 2021s. And this gives a early drinking, really lovely perfumed fruit forward profile to the wines as well. Gamay Noir is a variety that we're starting to see a lot more plantings of happening in the Willamette Valley as well. And it really makes sense. It's a continuation of the Burgundian narrative. That's an easy conversation to have, not only with growers, but with trade as well. Gamay Noir here in Oregon is a little different to how it's grown or displays itself in Bordelais. Again, quite more likely because of the climate situation, in that we have the wide open skies and heat, and now Gamay Noir gets a lot of sunshine on its skin, so it gives it really deep colors and thicker skins. And these Gamay Noirs in the Willamette Valley can be quite structured, quite deeply colored and have really good tannin profiles with lots of acidity. What I love about Gamay in the Willamette Valley is that it really retains its natural acidity and has such an energetic profile and lift to its palate. That it really holds up to some of those darker fruit flavors like pomegranate and blackberry and some pie fruits. Is also a lot of spicy flavors that will come through in Gamay. And again, this is sometimes because of the preponderance of whole cluster fermentation. So including the stems in those fermentation practices really does bring out a little bit more spice, that cinnamon bark, baking spice, some potting soil notes. And again, with the red spices, the rooibos teas and violets and peonies are really some more floral attributes and lively, spicy characters that come from Gamay Noir. Gamay in the valley is often bottled a little earlier than Pinot Noir. So anywhere being bottled from, say, March or April through to August as well. But there are some really great quality Gamay Noirs being produced, a lot from the marine sedimentary soils in Chehalem, Yamhill, Carlton, Ribbon Ridge AVAs as well, that help to really promote some of that red fruit lift and the sweet red spices as well. And this makes it a really food-friendly wine and just a slightly more energetic and easily approachable style of wine as well. But some great serious styles out there as well. It's going to be exciting to see what producers are doing with their Gamay as we see more and more plantings of this grape variety going into the ground. So this is the major AVAs within the Northern Willamette Valley. I'm sure most of you are familiar with this AVA map. The original AVAs being Dundee Hills, Eola Amity Hills, Chehalem Mountains, McMinnville, Yamhill, Carlton, and Ribbon Ridge. Those are the most densely planted areas and are definitely focused on Pinot Noir, although because of the size of Eola Amity and Tualatin Hills, Yamhill, Carlton, there's a lot more opportunity for varietal diversity to occur. And this is where we are seeing a lot of these newer varieties really being experimented with and taken a chance on. The Dundee Hills is quite a small AVA along with Ribbon Ridge, and it's basically already planted out. So there's not too much room in there anymore for really diversifying the plantings there. That said, there's still some really lovely Syrah, Nebbiolo, Tempranillo, Gamay Noir, and of course Chardonnay in those areas as well. Okay. So very similar to what I showed overall for the state, the temperature and precipitation in the Willamette Valley. We do get up into the averages of the high 90s, especially during the growing season. But we don't have huge diurnal temperature shifts, but they are large enough, often around 30 or 40 degrees, that they are helping to preserve our fresh acidities and keep the fruit really crisp and pristine in its flavor profile. You're not getting raisined, desiccated, dehydrated fruit flavors because the nights don't cool down here. We have a really lovely diurnal temperature shift, meaning the nights will drop down to cooler temperatures, even though the days have risen up to 90+ temperature. Again, that day length, and you can see that here, in comparison to Sonoma, our day length is much longer, or at least 2 hours longer than some of the areas further south. And again, that wind. So wind is really important for helping to preserve acidity, but also to slow down the ripening process. So a lot of the grapes will shut down a little during the ripening season. The grapes also will be impacted by the wind as well, in terms of it will develop naturally thicker skins in the grapes because of strong cooling wind influences. And also it will help to keep the canopy cooler and drier. And that means that we also don't have that need for a lot of additional sprays. It really helps with our rot situations as well, which is why you start to see the increase in vineyards and growers really being interested in promoting organic and biodynamic farming practices, because we can. It's a dry growing season with lots of wind influence, which means that rot is not as much of an issue in certain other areas. So now moving into Syrah, and the second most planted grape variety, according to the survey in Oregon as well. Syrah is really grown all over the state also, obviously not to the extent that Pinot Noir is, but it is the grape that is has seen the largest increase in plantings. A lot of that is occurring in the Eastern Oregon AVAs of Walla Walla, and especially the Rocks district of Milton Freewater. You can see those cobblestone rocks or river alluvial rocks in this image here. And this is a vineyard that is sitting down on that old ancient riverbed, and those rocks really help to sit out on top and reflect the heat, warm the soils, stop evaporation from the soils, and reflect the heat and light onto the clusters during the day, and also continued into the evening, where the temperatures here will drop quite dramatically as well. In the Umpqua and Rogue valleys, the Syrah and Rhone varieties are really increasing as well. Grenache is on the rise. Unfortunately, I don't have numbers for Grenache, but where Syrah is planted, there's also always a little Grenache being found as well. So Grenache, while it may not be 6% of the plantings, it's definitely being planted next to Syrah, and also some other Rhone varieties like Mourvedre or Cinsault are also being experimented with as well. So really trying to get an understanding of where our limits for ripening fruit are happening. And every year we're surprised by what is actually capable of being ripened here at good quality levels, and also at moderate alcohol levels and fresher fruit flavors. So that's really Oregon's key signature, is its medium bodies to full bodied, but with fresh fruit flavors, moderate alcohols, and fresh acidities, making these wines ideal for restaurants and food pairings, and just having more energetic, lively fruit flavors and palate profiles. So Syrah, we do have a variety of different Syrah clonal selections that have been either imported from France or also from Washington, which has the famed Joseph Phelps clone, and a selection of other clones. But the Phelps clone is really capturing the imagination of many producers in Walla Walla, where it produces a really distinctive, complex flavor profile with spice and fresh blueberry and black plum fruits, and a little bit more non-fruit flavors as well, in the forms of tobacco and chocolate and green peppercorn flavors. Again, depending on the elevation and the aspect of the vineyard is going to really determine this style of winemaking that is being made here. So whether you can include whole cluster fermentation, how much you're extracting from the skins, how gentle your punch downs and pump overs are going to be, and the exact length of fermentation on the skins, if you're able to ferment to dryness on the skins, is really being moderated by the growing season and your regional conditions, and of course the cultural philosophies of the winemaker themselves. So Syrah can be quite complex from around the state. Typically speaking, the wines out of Walla Walla and the Rocks district are very savory, meaty, umami bombs. A lot of black olive, green olive flavors, a lot of almost tar-like flavors as well. Very deep, dark, complex flavors coming through. In the Willamette Valley, Syrah, not to anyone's surprise, looks a little bit more like the handling of Pinot Noir, a little bit more red and purple fruit flavor profiles, and a little more pepper coming through from that cooler ocean influenced sites as well. Moving into Southern Oregon, those really deep alluvial soils and free draining rocky river soils are really helping to build perfectly ripe, plum, blueberry, fruit profiles in the Syrahs down here. And again, some use of whole cluster, but it's not a given. And also some use of Grenache in the blend down here as well. In the Rogue Valley and Applegate Valleys, it's definitely becoming known for its Rhone varieties, and Syrah is absolutely leading the charge down here with, again, those high elevation vineyards, but on riverbed soils, means that you have really fine-grained tannins, ripe fruit profiles without being overblown, and showing really great moderation of fruit flavors and alcohol levels as well. So a little bit more complexity, a little bit riper than the Willamette Valley, but not quite to the extent of the Walla Walla style. And Syrah, you tend to find more people over vintaging this. The wines from Walla Walla and the Rocks District are so forward and lush that you're quite capable of enjoying these early in their life, and you'll find some early bottled styles that haven't seen a lot of new oak influence, but then you also see the opposite of that in some reserve bottlings that are really concentrated and have a lot of new oak and will be over vintaged for a couple of years before release. So really a fun way to approach working with Syrah. And of course, there's also some Viognier co-fermented in many of the Syrahs around the state as well. So bringing some floral, more fruit purity flavors by including Viognier into that blend as well. I know that Syrah is maybe not necessarily seen so much out in the general marketplace across the US, but it's really worth seeking out because there are some really special, distinctive Syrahs being made that deserve a lot of attention. And this district of the Rocks District of Milton Freewater is one of those. It is based around the Walla Walla River, the old riverbed system here. So that entire area is really an ancient riverbed with a lot of rocky cobbles underneath. It's a nightmare to plant vineyards here. And those rocks really get pulled out and put back on top of the soil here. But what that means for the wines is that because this is quite a short growing season, up until, a couple of weeks ago, there was still snow on the ground here in freezing conditions. So the growing season is quite short. So they really rely on having these very deep soils that the roots can tap into very deeply, seeking water. Most vineyards here are still irrigated, but then you also need that additional warming of the very dark brown soils. The riverbed soils warm up easily, but then you also have on top of that the cobblestones that help to, again, retain the moisture in the soils, but also heat up during the hot of the day, where temperatures here can get well above 100 degrees, which also causes the vines to shut down and not ripen during those extreme temperatures. So it's during the evening, when the evening is cooling down, that those warm rocks being reflected back onto the grapes are really important for continuing the flavor development and ripening of the grapes, of the Syrah fruit happening here. And again, incredibly distinctive wines, very meaty, very savory, very umami laden wines that often will have some sweet oak aging on them, just to bring a little bit more fruit sweetness, because otherwise these wines can be like eating a liquid steak almost. They're very complex and very interesting, and an absolute pleasure to drink and to age as well. And again, Walla Walla Valley, it's hard when you see these, monthly averages as they're spread out over time, but the Walla Walla Valley, it's, premium, prime growing season temperatures are definitely closer to the hundreds, the 90s and hundreds, very high, hot and dry. But you can see that there's not quite as much diurnal temperature differences, and just how short that growing season is. The one problem here in Walla Walla and the Rocks District is the very cold continental winters that will sometimes lead to vine death. So it's a very extreme area to grow grapes and to make wine, but the wines that come out of here are truly exceptional and really unique wines, and definitely worth the struggle, as I'm sure anyone who's had the wines from that area will tell you. Moving into Southern Oregon, where Syrah is, the next highest planted grape variety as well. The Umpqua Valley is a little more like the Willamette Valley in terms of its climate profile. It's not quite as hot as the Rogue Valley, and it's a very thin valley here, so it's quite steep. The vineyards, except if you are planted down along the benchlands and the river systems, then you have some flat land to work with. But otherwise, most of the vineyards are quite high elevations on fairly steep slopes, really benefiting from the aspect facing to the sun to really ripen the fruit flavors. Give again cooling influences at night. The Umpqua Valley has some of the highest diurnal temperature shifts in the wine world. So these grape varieties do get very cool at night and cool down quite considerably, despite the temperature during the day being in the upper 90s. So again, these fruit flavors are just very fresh and pure and pristine because of those cooling influences in the evening. And most of the grape varieties that are grown here are Iberian, Rhone varieties, Bordeaux varieties, along with Pinot Noir. So it really is an area that, depending on your elevation and your aspect, you can almost grow anything here as well. Moving south into the Rogue Valley starts to widen out a little bit more, especially on the eastern side, that sort of northeasterly of the I-5 and northeasterly of Medford in that Bear Creek Valley. These are wide open alluvial valleys, so very free draining. This is where more of your Bordeaux and Bordeaux varieties and Iberian varieties are grown. And then the Applegate Valley to the west of Ashland and Medford is a cooler, thinner valley where you have slightly higher elevations and really dominated by a lot of river alluvial benchlands plantings. So a lot cooler and more moderate, more savory, delicate fruited Rhone varieties and Iberian varieties grown in that Applegate Valley as well. Again, they also get the influence coming in from the Pacific Ocean, but it has a little more area to travel through. And a lot of these vineyards are planted on east-west lateral valleys, so they really do get that cooling influence coming in from the Pacific here as well. But keep in mind in the Rogue Valley that most of the vineyards are at high elevation, so 1,200 to 2,200 feet in elevation. So this is where you're also delaying that ripening factor and really building in your ability to have more moderate, lighter bodied styles of wine, but still a protracted growing season. So you're getting flavor development without getting the high alcohols and not losing your acidity, that freshness of the acidity being really important in Oregon wines. So temperature and precipitation in Southern Oregon, you can see this diurnal temperature shift here is really indicated in those high in the temperatures here. So during the evenings, you're getting such a drastic drop in temperature that it's really buffering out a lot of the temperature exchange. Again, also these are really close proximity ranges and mountains are having a cooling effect as well, where the high elevation cooling temperatures are sucked down into the river valley and move through the vineyards. So you definitely get that cooling influence happening regularly in the afternoons, so much so that even though it's 100-degree day or higher, by 6 o'clock you'll be requiring a sweater to wear because of just how that large diurnal shift is happening and coming through that area. So lots of wind movement, lots of air movement down here, really helping to bring those more moderate complex wine styles together. The Bordeaux varieties, so Cabernet Sauvignon and Cabernet Franc are really on the rise in Oregon as well. They've been very well planted and well documented in both Walla Walla and the Rogue Valley, but there's sort of a love affair that's starting to happen with Cabernet Franc in across Oregon as well. It makes really lovely distinctive styles of wine in that medium-bodied component with quite a bit of complexity. 40 to 50-degree temperature swings this last weekend down in the Rogue Valley as well. But very, very reliant on that diurnal temperature swing happening down here. And this is really core to the high elevation fruit and the alluvial soils that give those really nice, energetic wines. And capable of long ripening wines. So Cabernet Sauvignon, 5% of Oregon's plantings. Again, Cabernet Franc is around 1%, coming up to 2%, but there's a lot of producers that are really excited by the plantings that are happening of Bordeaux varieties as well. And again, they stay in that more moderate, medium-bodied profile. They have really lovely cedary, pencily tannins that have nice fine structure and fine grain to them, but most of the fruit flavor complexity is sitting in that black currant, black cherry, violets, some nice baking spice flavors happening as well. A lot of attention needs to be paid to how you extract the tannin profiles. And in Cabernet, not so much in Cabernet Franc because the skins are a little thinner, but Cabernet Sauvignon can have the very rustic, firm tannins. But cool fermentations, gentle handling of the tannins, and also pressing off ferments a little early so that you're not at the high alcohol levels extracting a lot of tannin profile and bitter tannins. So very intentional winemaking practices to match the medium-bodied fruit and fresh acidity with not digging, bringing out overblown, overly tannic wines that require, so much aging that you can barely get to them within the first decade of their life. One thing that's really special to Oregon and is close to many people's hearts is the Tempranillo vineyards in the Umpqua Valley, where Abasala were the first folks to bring in Tempranillo and have really worked quite hard with the authorities in Spain and a lot of Spanish producers to bring in some really beautiful clonal selections of Tempranillo and find out what works best in Oregon's vineyards. So these really deep, fault line marine sediment soils, a lot of sandstone, alluvial soils that allow the grapes' root systems to go deep. And as you can see, they're trained quite high here. That's Earl Jones standing in the vineyard with his Tempranillo fruit. And he was one of the first to bring in these clonal selections. But they do, like Ribera del Duero and those regions in Spain that are high elevation, high diurnal shifts and have quite hot days and cool nights. These Tempranillo grapes in the Umpqua Valley do have a similar resemblance with just a little more freshness to those profiles. And of course, the aging aging considerations. Everyone understands all of the different reserva levels for Rioja and Tempranillo, Ribera del Duero and Toro in Spain. But there's a lot of producers that are playing around with the similar aging profiles, and then also looking to make more fresher, earlier drinking styles as well that really highlight the beautiful purity and freshness of the fruit here, instead of that extended aging system as well. So Tempranillo does incredibly well in actually every AVA in Oregon as well. There's several plantings of it in the Umpqua Valley, in the Rogue Valley, the Applegate Valley, several plantings in the Willamette Valley that are quite old and have really lovely blue and red fruit flavors as well, and fresh tobacco flavor profiles. So allowing the Willamette Valley to have a fuller bodied red. There's also Grenache planted in the Willamette Valley now, along with Mencia. And so these Iberian fruit profiles that are really lining up quite well with Spain's growing profiles, their growing conditions. A lot of Galician climate is comparable to much of the Willamette Valley in terms of when the rainfall happens, how much rainfall is received, and then those long dry summers is very similar. We've got a couple of Mencia vineyards up here in the valley. I work with one, and then Abbey Roadworks has some in its pocket as well. And then also obviously Analemma up in the gorge was the first person to plant Mencia as well. But really beautiful wines at low alcohol levels and lots of complexity as well. So I love the Iberian varieties for Oregon. It's a lot of fun. So this is where Tempranillo is planted all over, and those classic Tempranillo flavors, cherry, dried fig, plum, cedar, tobacco, dill are all quite common, and depending on what, again, your aging preferences for Tempranillo. But I find some of the most delicious Tempranillos to be handled a little bit more like almost like Beaujolais in terms of a gentle extraction and really highlighting that delicious red fruited, blue fruited, energetic profile as being some of my favorite wines as well from the grape variety. But there's a Tempranillo Alliance that happens as well in Oregon. And so there's some really great fun tastings that happen around the Tempranillo, because it is a grape variety that's loved and grown in every AVA here. Coming back to Bordeaux and Rhone varieties, I've already touched on these. Here's just an image of the Columbia Gorge on the left-hand side and the Applegate Valley on the right. You can see just how important these river systems and mountain systems are to Oregon, and to how they impact our really lovely, fresh fruit flavor profile. Oh, I just got a message about a carbonic Tempranillo. That sounds delicious to me. Look forward to trying it, Dylan. Cabernet Franc, Malbec, and Merlot. Okay, this is really where we're starting to have a lot of fun. I think that Oregon makes some of the best Merlot in the world that I've tried. The Applegate Valley especially has some really beautiful old vine Merlot vines that are really just so elegant and everything that Merlot should be. Lots of strawberry, raspberry, plum, and lovely cigar box tobacco, fine grained tannins as well. Sadly Merlot went out of favor several years ago, but hopefully someone's championing it and bringing it back. Cabernet Franc and Malbec. Again, Malbec here, we have a couple of South American winemakers here that talk about how different Malbec is in Oregon, and who are just so excited about it because it retains its acidity here. It retains its purple and blackberry and blue fruit profile, along with lots of violets and floral aromatics. Again, this concept of freshness in Oregon wines is really what makes them so easy to drink, and so food friendly, and also very age worthy as well. Cabernet Franc, there's a lot of producers in the Willamette Valley that are sourcing fruit from Southern Oregon for Cabernet Franc until some more plantings of Cabernet Franc happen in the Willamette Valley. Cabernet Franc in the Willamette Valley is grown. It's one of the latest grape varieties to be harvested right at the end of October, but it produces, again, really lovely full flavor development because without pyrazines, because of us being able to open up the fruit zone and bring in that UV light with the moderate heat and sunshine, allows for Cabernet Franc at low alcohols or moderate alcohols, 13% alcohol, but with very full flavor development without the bell pepper characters that you often have in California and Washington Cabernet Francs and Malbecs. So really a future for Bordeaux varieties happening here as well. Currently, we still seem to see mostly varietal bottlings of all of these varieties. There's not a lot of people who are blending all of them together at the moment. So we're still really very much focused on varietal bottlings. I think that'll probably start to change as we start to introduce more and more plantings in the traditional AVAs. However, because we're also trying to see what these grape varieties do and what they're capable of, I think everyone at the moment is really committed to continuing that varietal landscape conversation, just to see what these varieties do on their own. And then after that, I think we'll start to see some really interesting blends happening. We are the new world. We are, the US. We don't need to, follow regulations that are implemented by a lot of regional groups like they have in Europe. So these concepts of only blending, Merlot and Cabernet Sauvignon and Cabernet Franc together should be going out the window, and there should be a lot more experimentation happening with, blending Pinot Noir and Cabernet Franc. I don't know, give Pinot Noir some tannic backbone. I'm sure there's a lot of things that can be done for producers who have the creativity and the interest to make the best wine that comes from their property. But it's certainly an exciting place to be in Oregon at the moment, with how much is really capable of being grown here. And we're really only limited by our imagination and by the roots, the clonal selections that are given to us as well. And yeah, Tom, that's a great point. Leah does make some really lovely Gamay and Cab Franc blends as well. Yes, and lots of, oh my gosh, I love there's a comment here about the Italian varietals, especially Sangiovese and Barbera. There's Nebbiolo, long planted in the Willamette Valley as well, but I love Sangiovese and Barbera actually from the Rogue Valley. It's one of my favorite varieties down there. Unfortunately, we don't have statistical information on it, so it's all I know are the few couple of vineyards that I see every now and then in wine judging or when I get down there to taste. So there's certainly a big opportunity for Italian varieties, especially with their freshness and tannin profile as well. Fits really well with the Oregon fruit profile as well. Any other questions before we bring David back to tell you more about Oregon Wine Month? Yeah, Oregon Malbec event in Portland. I missed that, unfortunately, but hopefully I'll get to it next year. Yeah, if there's no more questions, I will let David tell you about Oregon Wine Month and other opportunities out there, and to let you know about next week's. It's next week. Next
It
week's
is next week.
webinar.
Yep.
Yeah.
The final of the four, entitled Understanding the Soils and Climate. So another great deep dive. Bree, good job with the talk of some of these fun red varietals, and the weather getting nice and having barbecue season coming up. It's exciting. Your pairings there, and certainly love to drink red wines into the warm weather. I have dropped a couple things in the chat. So our Oregon Wine Month Toolkit. So there's tons of information in there. You can find the recordings of these webinars there, amongst other educational opportunities that we have. If anybody has anything directly to reach out to Bree or myself for, here are our websites, and we are responsive, and we love connecting with the trade. And we look forward to seeing everybody here next week at the same time. And thanks for your support.
Thanks, everyone.